It's a Star Wars show, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. On this week's episode, rather interesting casting news broke this week. Should we start treating the Star Wars franchise differently? Should we rethink all of this? A lot of what I'm about to say on that front is going to be considered sacrilege by a lot of fans. Also, quite a bit of email came in this past week. I'm very much appreciative of that. You can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, so we will answer your emails this week as well. If this is one of the first times that you have found the show, I hope that you will subscribe. If you are enjoying this on YouTube, and of course, on whatever podcast platform you happen to be listening to the show on, be sure to subscribe there as well. And check out my science fiction space opera adventure series, EMBARK. 7 books in all in the series, available on Amazon.com. In ebook, Kindle Unlimited, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And I'll provide for you some more details about my science fiction series when we get later into the episode. Now, let's go ahead and kick things off.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So, Screen Rant, the story originally came out on The Hollywood Reporter. I'm working off of a few notes here from Screen Rant, who says, Ryan Gosling is the biggest actor casting in Star Wars history and a massive break from Lucas. So Ryan Gosling is apparently in talks to join Star Wars, and it completely breaks with George Lucas's traditions. The future of Star Wars remains a mystery right now. We know that The Mandalorian and Grogu is releasing in May of 2026, but nobody knows what comes next. And there was a new detail relating to The Mandalorian and Grogu, Rhoda the Hutt, which plays a prominent role in the film, apparently, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. You'll probably see something similar to this when the first trailers come out. But apparently this particular Hutt, Rhoda the Hutt, which originally debuted as a baby in the Clone Wars movie that was released in theaters, which was the first of the Clone Wars series that we were exposed to. So he's going to be grown up now. And apparently he's playing like a gladiator-type figure. And listen, I'm always excited for Star Wars. But again, I'm not like over the moon excited for The Mandalorian and Grogu. I feel like this is Disney attempting to course correct and going with their most popular currently characters in doing this movie that would have been a season 4 of The Mandalorian. Now, getting back to the Ryan Gosling news. That said, a recent disturbance in the Force may have given us a massive clue of which way the franchise is going, with reports that Ryan Gosling is in talks to join Star Wars, potentially set to star in Sean Levy's mysterious movie. Now, precious little is known about Levy's film. It seems to be becoming his focus after the success of Deadpool and Wolverine. And Levy hinted it's a standalone, a set apart in the Star Wars timeline. As he explained, there's only so many times that Star Wars movies can revisit the same section of the timeline. And so it's really forced me, because I don't want to do a Star Wars movie that is redundant to others, nor am I interested in doing one that has to serve another movie. Now, the idea of Gosling as the star is an absolute game changer, writes Screen Rant, though, and not just because it suggests the future is in motion once again. And listen, what they're driving at here, and I'll skip to the last portion of the article because a lot more is said in the Screen Rant article, but given the star power of Ryan Gosling at the moment, and it does break with the tradition of going with unknowns, this would be a departure from what we've seen in Star Wars films, wherein they're getting an actor who could be a draw in and of himself on top of it being a Star Wars movie. Now, I certainly understand the logic. I don't particularly see like Ryan Gosling playing a Jedi-type figure. I see him more as a Han Solo-type figure. Now, that being said, it's mostly because these are the types of action roles that he typically plays. So I'll be very curious to find out what is going on with Sean Levy's film and what he is planning. I'm very much of the opinion, if you've listened to the shows at all, that I want Star Wars to return to that sci-fi fantasy element that made the original trilogy and the franchise in and of itself so great. You know, we've had our Skeleton Crew, which I loved. You know, that was a fun series and adventure. We've, had our Mandalorian, which I've loved. You know, I love The Mandalorian. The third season had its weaker spots, but again, it had its own lore with the Mandalorians. But I want to get back to the core of Star Wars and the Force and Jedis. And now maybe Sean Levy's film focuses on this, and it's just set completely apart from everything else. Okay, so there's really no way to properly speculate without having a little bit more information. I'm going off of Ryan Gosling and his most recent films like The Fall Guy, which I enjoyed quite a bit, but I can see him more of being a smuggler Han Solo type than a Jedi type. But who knows what they're planning for this movie. Now, getting back to the Screen Rant article, it says, the sad truth right now is that Star Wars has gone through something of a rough period. Lucasfilm seemed to lose confidence in the movies after the box office failure of Solo, A Star Wars Story, and poor critical reception of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. And again, sort of as I'm reminded of Solo, A Star Wars Story, I can't imagine that Sean Levy's film would be along those lines of following another Han Solo type character, given that we already have that film with Solo, A Star Wars Story. The studio pivoted to Disney Plus TV shows for the last 5 years, and these have been successful, albeit with diminishing returns. 2026, The Mandalorian and Grogu will mark Star Wars and its return to the big screen, but Lucasfilm can be forgiven for wanting some star power in their movies just in case. Now, The Mandalorian and Grogu, we found out, will feature, in a small role, Sigourney Weaver, another big-name actor, although we don't yet know what part she's playing or how significant her role will be. Now, Ryan Gosling is in talks to join Star Wars as well. It feels as though the Rubicon has been crossed, and now Star Wars will acknowledge its own cultural significance by drawing in bigger names than ever before. That's a decided shift from George Lucas's approach, albeit an understandable one, and it signals a change in the nature of Hollywood itself. This has clearly become a very interesting time for Star Wars. And listen, this dovetails nicely into what I wanted to talk about on this week's episode.
Will you have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down?
I've done various iterations of this type of line of thinking, but I saw this news of Ryan Gosling, and this was after we watched The Batman. This is the Matt Reeves Batman that came out with Robert Pattinson. Probably the third time I've seen it, I think. Oddly enough, I don't own it, and I need to. Really enjoyed it this time around, though, watching it with the members of the family, my boys, that hadn't seen it yet. And it got me thinking about something. And it goes along with, is it time to rethink this franchise? Is it time to stop treating Star Wars like some sacred cow and start having fun with this franchise? Because it seems as if the attempt by Lucasfilm and Disney has been to try to continue to duplicate what made Star Wars so popular in the beginning. And I certainly understand the logic behind that. And it's, it worked to a certain extent, kicking off with The Force Awakens, but as was mentioned in that Screen Rant article, it's been, diminishing returns ever since then. So I'm watching The Batman over the weekend, and suddenly it dawned on me that maybe we start treating Star Wars more like we do superheroes. And what I mean by that is, instead of adhering so much to the existing timelines and leaving the original trilogy untouched and not recasting people, we have these characters that you could go and compare to Marvel and DC. Star Wars is its own genre now. You have your Supermans and your Batmans and your Wonder Woman and your Iron Man and your Captain America, and these all are and have proven to be, characters that Marvel and Disney could go and bank on with the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies what you see with DC now and the attempts to rebrand that and the new Superman movie coming out. But what we've seen with these characters are taking them and telling different types of stories using different actors. Batman is probably one of the best examples, but we've seen it happen with Superman as well. You have your Christopher Reeves, you have your Brandon Routh, you have your Henry Cavill. Now you have this new Superman character. You have all these different iterations of Batman. What if they started to treat the characters within Star Wars more like they have with superheroes? Where you could have your big event films with all your characters together, but we could go out and tell these individual stories and go back to those older timelines. Have some fun with the franchise. Make a Luke Skywalker movie that isn't beholden to the original trilogy. I mean, we as fans have grown to accept that you have the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. You also have the, Batman movies from Tim Burton, and you have the other ones within that particular timeline that came out. We now have a Robert Pattinson, Batman. We have the Batman played by Ben Affleck. I mean, we have all these different iterations of Batman, a lot of which have gone Spider-Man, same thing. So what if they started to look at this franchise and said, when we have these marquee characters that people love, let's break the mold a little bit and allow directors to come in and present their own vision based off of the original backstories. I'm talking going so far as to change up, some of the looks of, how vehicles and ships look and operate. I mean, we've had how many different versions? We've had just as many versions of the Batmobile as we have of the Batman character in and of himself. And I know what I'm talking about is sacrilege. And maybe Star Wars is already too wrapped up in its own canon and timeline to do this. But when you look towards the future, I don't think you're ever going to be able to get back to what we had before in terms of the magic that was captured, during the late 70s into the 80s of the original trilogy and then into the 2000s with the prequel trilogy. We just don't live in that world anymore. Tastes are different. Movie-going experience or box office returns are different. The movie-going experience is different. And this desire to continue down the path that we've been on in telling these stories and trying to adhere to some certain structure and, again, looking at the original trilogy like it's this sacred thing that can't ever be duplicated again, maybe it's time that we do that. Maybe it's time we give a director a chance to choose a different actor to play Luke Skywalker and to tell his origin story again. Like what we saw in A New Hope, but a different spin on it. Bring something fresh and new to the Star Wars franchise. I don't anticipate that this will ever happen. But it is some of the out-of-the-box thinking that I think is necessary now, looking at the franchise and its inability and fear that it seems to have right now to put another movie back on the big screen, thinking that they're going to, do more harm to themselves. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this Ryan Gosling move, and perhaps this is the step towards something that I'm talking about, where we do have a new character that gets introduced in some different part of the galaxy, and Sean Levy has landed on something. It's just so difficult to go and think about that because the core of Star Wars, really is that original trilogy, and so you deviate from telling that story structure that so many of us are accustomed to with little variations. And, is it still Star Wars? I know I'm kind of throwing a lot of things out there. I love this franchise, and I'd like to see more diversity in the storytelling and more outside-of-the-box thinking about these original characters that we loved so much. I suppose we did have, the closest thing that we got to this was the recasting of Alden Ehrenreich with Solo. And I thought that worked really well. And I don't see any reason why we can't go and recast a Luke Skywalker and maybe if we don't tell an origin story akin to A New Hope, maybe just tell a side story within the timeline of the original trilogy that says, this is what Luke Skywalker went through during this period of time, and we just tell a different story. It doesn't need to have any sort of further connection to the other films apart from happening at that certain age and what he was dealing with at the time of the rebellion. Just a story within a story. Just again, kick it outside the box a bit. I don't know. What do you think? Am I out of my mind? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com is the email address. I'd love to hear from you.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
You're all friends of the show and answering your emails this week. We start off with Disney Desi, who writes, I loved Skeleton Crew, but could not convince my husband to watch. He had a bad taste in his mouth for Star Wars after The Acolyte, so he had no interest in watching this show, despite the fact that I kept telling him it's really good. Maybe he didn't believe me because I liked The Acolyte. Ha ha. I think if people actually gave this show a chance, they would love it too. I understand why people didn't like The Acolyte. However, Skeleton Crew doesn't have any of those problems. Pacing, acting, chanting, witches, etc. I wish people would get over their issues with Disney Star Wars and watch Skeleton Crew because it's absolutely worth it. Listen, I'm about to go back and do a rewatch of Acolyte. As I've mentioned, there's a couple of episodes I'll probably skip, but I didn't really have a problem with the pacing. I just had certain problems with a bit of the storytelling, but overall, I liked what they were trying to accomplish. That show suffered from so much of the commentary outside of the show itself that just doomed it within the fandom, that it just left itself sitting there, wounded, waiting for the vultures to come and pick at it. All right. The Never Adventures writes this. Really enjoyed the show as a whole. I really appreciated the production value, speaking of Skeleton Crew, the acting, and the love that seems to have been put into the series. Would love to see more efforts like this. I wish that they had made it into a 2-hour movie. I really enjoyed Skeleton Crew. I'm looking forward to going back and watching it. But as I mentioned last week, I think that you could have made it a really fun Goonies big screen movie, and it would have done well. Just my opinion on it. Thank you for the email. James writes this. I'm writing to let you know that I enjoy your podcast. Thank you, James. I started listening about a year ago and binged some older episodes as well. I'm not sure whether I'm considered a hardcore fan or a casual fan, but I watch everything Star Wars and enjoy a majority of it. I especially enjoyed the sequels. Of the live action, I enjoyed The Acolyte, Skeleton Crew, and even Obi-Wan. I finished Book of Boba Fett, but felt they could have done way more with the character. Yeah, I've always contended that Mandalorian was supposed to be Boba Fett. They didn't think they were going to do Boba Fett, and then decided to do Boba Fett and had to make him different because the Mandalorian was already doing Boba Fett. I'm also working my way through the never-ending list of considered canon books. 320 of them, and I'm on number 4. I'm a lightsaber collector. Nice. As well, sitting at 8 right now. All Black series, mostly Elite. Yeah, I have 2. I have an old Master Replicas, Anakin's blue lightsaber from Attack of the Clones, and then I have a Legacy saber, really nice one, with the removable blade. Display case up there, too. I believe it's Master Replicas as well. I also just listened to EMBARK on Audible. Thank you, James. Really liked the story and enjoyed the whole book. Looking forward to listening to the second one, though I have to wait for my next credit. I listen to podcasts, sometimes books, on my way to work. My favorite are Ready Player One, Armada, Red Shirts, and the Kaiju Preservation Society. If you haven't checked them out, I recommend them. I'm positive I'll listen to EMBARK again on my drives. Thanks. Take care and keep up the good work for a reason, James. Thank you so much, James. And what I always say with my EMBARK books is that if you enjoy book 1, you'll definitely enjoy the rest of the series. The series gets better as it goes along. Book 1 was my first effort ever writing a novel. It's epic in scope. I'm very proud of that book. That being said, as you move through the books, they do just get better and better as my skills develop. There's talk within, sort of self-publishers and new authors that, maybe you can go back and rewrite the first book, and it's so hard. I've thought about going back and rewriting the first book, but I've made a couple of different passes at it, made some adjustments. I think it's on its 4th or 5th iteration. I've actually rewritten, I don't think most people even know this, I've rewritten a whole new prologue to book 1. A much more exciting prologue than before. I changed that about a year ago. I'm really proud of that first book, but like I said, if you like the first one, I'm fairly certain that you will love the rest of the books in the series. N. Black writes this. Skeleton Crew was great, and EMBARK is hard to please. It's unfortunate that it kind of went unnoticed. As far as the Mandalorian film and the supposed premise, I agree that premise sucks. I like a bounty hunter from the animated show, but seeing Road to the Hutt again is not something I can get excited about. Who knows? Maybe it'll be good, but I'm not holding my breath. Friend of the show and fellow content creator, Star Wars Santa, be sure to check him out on YouTube, makes a similar comment that I've been making. I would love for Disney Plus to stitch together continuous play versions of these shows. Yes, please. Fade to black at the end of one episode, fade black in with the next, without the intro and outro between the episode. Yes, I would love to see that. I would love to see that happen. I couldn't agree with you more, Star Wars Santa. Let's see. Edwin, good to hear from Edwin, says, I enjoyed the finale, but at first it felt it was too simple and safe. But those were my expectations for a tie-in or a big reveal or cameo. But I thought about it, and it was a perfect ending for an 80s film like Goonies and E.T. My 14-year-old son didn't feel the same. He enjoyed every episode. But the finale, he was disappointed. I think because he was hoping for a big reveal, a cameo, etc. He didn't see those 80s films, and I understood his disappointment or couldn't relate to why they made the ending like that. Anyways, this show was a blast, and I hope to watch more Star Wars content this new year and listen to your show, listening and chiming in from time to time. I pray for you and your family and that they're blessed, safe, and may the Force be with you all, Edwin. Very kind of you, Edwin. Prayers out to you and your family as well. And lastly, Mark Jackson writes this. I agree with you that I think the Empire invaded all of the jewel worlds. The fact that SM-33 destroyed the coordinates to At-Aten enabled them to escape the Empire's wrath. Yeah, and I know there was quite a bit of criticism over the end of Skeleton Crew, how it kind of ended abruptly. And listen, my guess is that they had an expectation that it was going to do well and there would be a season where they could follow up. I think there was a cameo probably planned. That's why you saw that Corvette show up at the end. But they decided to ditch that idea at the last minute. And it seems like there were some individuals, at least you listeners of the show, that would have liked to have seen that happen. By the way, a quick note. On the Knights of Vader podcast with my buddy Zach Weber, I'm going to be joining him, I think this weekend. We're doing a show together. So that should be out probably in the next few weeks. But always fun to go on other people's podcasts, right? Make them do all the editing work. So thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. Please go to Amazon.com. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. I wrote my series for adults, but it's great, age appropriate for those 11 and older. You can pick up EMBARK Book 1 today on Amazon.com. Just search for EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, and Jon Justice. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with romance and really cool technology and a lot of action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Follow a stargazer, a headstrong and gifted pilot, a hardened former military officer, a tech geek, and a ship whisperer. When it comes to motley crews, the Anniversary has most starships beat. But as a ruthless corporate madman bent on tyranny attempts to exploit an apocalyptic industrial accident, it might fall to this ragtag band of unlikely heroes to save Earth's evacuees from annihilation if they can survive each other first. So check out my fast-paced and action-packed science fiction adventure on Amazon, and I hope wherever you are, you're anticipating next week's show, and you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.